And welcome on into the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Mallinwood here with Zach Mallinwood. Zach, what's going on? We have a week of football in the books.
Yeah, very excited to have football back, and we're in the prime of fantasy season. Very, very happy right now.
Yeah, so week two and week one was very eventful. We're going to break that down. We're going to set you guys up for week two. Who goes in your lineup? Who comes out? Some standouts that we saw, some flex options, and of course, we're going to end it with our locks of the week and our ones to watch. Those guys that you want to pick up on waivers now, just based on what they might do in the next week or so, or what other guys on their team might do in the next week. And there's a little foreshadowing there of what my pick is. And Zach, I think that it makes sense for us to start with the big story of the week, and that's the New York Jets. They lose their quarterback for the season, Aaron Rodgers. He tears his Achilles 4 snaps into the season. Jet fans have been waiting for a long time to have a quarterback that they know is a stable quarterback, and they lost him after four tries in.
Yeah, it's a painful one, and you and I living in New York, it's a hard one because of just the journey as Jet fans. It's a painful one, but I mean, Rodgers was going to do great things, and the Jets really have to adjust, and Zach Wilson has it in his hands now. And I mean, it's only been about 2 months that he's been learning under Rodgers, but we're hoping and praying, Brett, that he learned something there, and it's going to help him for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think that it makes a lot of sense here to read the statement that Aaron came out with just a few minutes ago. As I pull it up here, he said, "Thank you to every person that's reached out, called, texted, DM'd, connected through friends, etc. It has meant a ton to me. I'll try to get back to all of you soon. I'm completely heartbroken and moving through all the emotions, but I'm deeply touched and humbled by all the support and love. Please keep me in your thoughts and prayers as I begin the healing process today. The night is darkest before the dawn, and I shall rise yet again. Proud of my guys, 1-0 with a little jet emoji there." And Zach, I think the big takeaway, at least from this, is that he's not retiring.
Yeah, definitely. And you know that he's probably going to be coming back for another year, and he doesn't want his career to end this way. This guy's a competitor year in and year out, and won't go all this way to come to New York and then get injured and be like, all right, well, it's done after 4 snaps.
Yeah, I think like the whole King of the City, that's kind of the mantra that he took in the last couple months, showing up at all the different sporting events and Broadway plays. And, he really owned this one. And yeah, for him to get out there, 4 snaps, it finally comes to fruition, coming running out with the flag on 9/11, national TV. And for that to happen in front of the whole world, I think it really was an embarrassing moment for him, I would say, where he felt like he let everyone down. He let the whole city down, including his teammates. And yeah, a little bit of a Batman sort of reference there with the night is darkest before the dawn, should rise yet again. I think that at least from a fantasy football perspective, we should talk about it in the sense of if you have Rodgers and he's on your dynasty team, you're obviously stashing him. From a side of if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to buy low on Rodgers, like, yeah, okay, you can consider it. He's going to be coming off an Achilles injury and he's 40 and you're not really sure what next year is even going to bring. So yeah, it's something that I would consider doing if I had him on my dynasty team. Obviously redraft, you're not keeping him. He's done for the year. He's going to sit on my IR spot though and coach my guys up until I need a roster spot. But yeah, he'll sit in the IR spot just for the moral support. But I really think that we got to talk about Zach Wilson and what the impact might be with Zach Wilson there from a fantasy football perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's you got to look at this offense and Garrett Wilson at wide receiver, along with Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook at running back. And I think those 3 probably take the biggest hit. I think Lazard would have been good pairing up with Rodgers, but was also just always going to be a flex option in fantasy. Now he's pretty much a bench guy unless you really see something in the next couple of weeks maybe some chemistry between him and Zach Wilson. But the focus is probably the top guy is Garrett Wilson in my mind. His upside, we talked about before the season started, he's probably a top 5 wide receiver. Now I think you got to put him outside the top 10. I think that's probably just the spot for him. Maybe he can improve from there, but we're talking about a guy with Zach Wilson last year that really struggled to get in the end zone. I don't think he did get in the end zone with Zach Wilson at quarterback last year. That takes a ton of value away. And obviously the receiving yards, the volume, it was there last season, but we're talking about a guy who had 1,200 yards and could have gotten to 15 or 1,600 yards with Aaron Rodgers. So I think he's at that level where he was last year now. It's disappointing for people who drafted him higher up in drafts, and it's a big hit. I think the biggest hit goes to Garrett Wilson in this offense.
Yeah, I think for me, Brees and Dalvin, they're probably going to get an uptick as they lean more into the run, obviously more than they would have had with Rodgers there. Will Garrett Wilson have less of an impact? Sure. I think he's a really strong wide receiver too, though. Still, I think that you really like the talent. He's going to get the ball. They're going to make sure that they get the ball to him. And it was something that last year they sort of struggled at early in the year of figuring out ways to get him the ball, and they kind of figured it out down the stretch. And by then, Zach Wilson wasn't even the quarterback. So I think this time around, coordinator, I think that that's an important thing as well. Nathaniel Hackett, and he's now going to be put under the pressure because, of course, his head coaching did last year in Denver, and now the pressure's on here. He loses his quarterback, and the microscope's going to be on him a lot. How does he run now with Zach Wilson? I think that he's going to utilize a guy like Garrett Wilson. So not sure it's going to have that much of an effect on the wide receivers. But I mean, listen, Zach Wilson, he wasn't really that bad the other night. There was the interception, and watching back the play, like he tried to throw it through 2 guys and get it to Randall Cobb, where he really just should have thrown it to the guy right next to him, and Alan Lazard, who was sort of open. Will at 9-13 after that for 99 yards and a touchdown. It's not bad. Listen, it's average. I'm not saying that I would start Zach Wilson on my fantasy team now, but he's definitely an add in a super flex. In any super flex, obviously you want to have a starting quarterback, and so those are pretty scarce. And people who have budgets, I'm sure, we're spending a lot in the last day or so on Zach Wilson. But that said, I agree with the decision from Saleh, from Joe Douglas, sticking with Zach Wilson. I think it was just the quote from Saleh that kind of settled a little bit as far as the fantasy perspective goes. He was like, everything about him is much different than it was last year. And you kind of saw that on Monday. He was a little more patient, things like that. They're going to continue to work with him. And so, I think that really for me, though, the only guy who really gets a big uptick from a receiver perspective is actually the tight end, Ty Conklin. Last year, he was really, really good with Zach Wilson. He used him as a safety valve, and he finished his tight end 16. Monday, we saw Mecole Hardman didn't even play on offense the second that Rodgers got injured. And so they played a lot of 12 formation, and that was the 2 tight ends. And we saw what Conklin was able to do in that. And so I think that that's where you're going to see a lot of continuation. And they'll probably use a lot more of the 2 tight end set because Zach's more comfortable using that. He did that a lot last year. But for me, I'm not sure that the receivers are going to get like that much of a huge drop off.
That's fair. I think from looking at it, I think Garrett Wilson, just like I said, I think he slots into probably top 20, top 15, rather than top 10, top 5 each and every week. I think Hall and Cook, their value definitely just went up. The one thing I'll say is, from watching the game the other day, I mean, Breece Hall looks like he could be like 2 weeks away, and he's like, okay, yeah, I'm 100% then. This guy was every single play. He looked like he was ready to go, and he had a couple of monster gains. I think when it comes to Dalvin Cook, he's a little bit more of a matchup play than Breece Hall because he is that pure running back, where Breece is really just, he's going for 50 yards if he gets an opening.
Right, I agree. And I think that we're going to find that later on in the season. And as we've spoken about multiple times, it's going to come down to Brees working his workload back up. And he didn't get that much work the other night, but he really utilized those 10 carries and exploded on quite a few of them. And so you saw those angry runs. And so I think there's going to be more of that. And, Dalvin he'll mix in here and there. I'm not sure if it's going to be that much of a difference on Dobbins part of the value, but I think you're going to see more carries from Brees definitely now with Zach Wilson there.
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, so now we jump into another backfield, and there was an injury in Baltimore. It was J.K. Dobbins as he tears his Achilles. And Zach, I mean, it was a kind of crowded backfield to begin with over there. Now, obviously, J.K. Dobbins is out. What's the outlook right now in Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much there. I think Justice Hill and Gus Edwards are the top two guys. They're probably at best flex plays because they're in an offense with a quarterback who loves to run in Lamar Jackson, and he's going to take some of those carries away. Justice Hill had a really solid game. So did Gus Edwards, except Justice Hill got the 2 touchdowns right on the goal line, and that boosted up his value a little bit more. I think it's going to be even. I think it's going to be they're going to go by committee with those two. I don't really think they're going to add another guy. I don't think that's going to be especially a guy that's fantasy relevant. I don't think that's going to happen in Baltimore. I think it's going to be Hill and Edwards. And like I said, they're going to be flex plays. As far as Dobbins, I think you got to hold on to him probably in Dynasty if you aren't contending right now. But I would start to think about it if you are a contending team. It's early enough in the year that you can add someone that you think has that rest of season type value that can help take you over the line maybe when it comes postseason time. I don't know if somebody is willing to get Dobbins, but I feel like there's enough people that will look at Dobbins and say, okay, maybe a couple years down the line, he could be a solid piece to my team. And then you get a trade for J.K. Dobbins. I would look into it. It may not happen, but I think it's time because the contract year is really right ahead right now.
Yeah, I think there's a butt for every seed. I think that J.K. Dobbins he's still a name. I think that honestly, just personally, I think his value is cratered just based on the fact that he can't stay healthy and the contract year. And, there's a whole bunch of rumblings the last couple of weeks leading up into the season that they didn't trust him. All of that was out there, and then he gets injured. And so, yeah, for me, his value's cratered. It's not a guy that I would be looking out to go get. However, if I did already own him, yeah, I'd probably be looking for a guy that can at least impact you this season, especially, as you just said, if you are a contender. As far as the rest of the guys there, my guy Gus Edwards, he had 8 carries for 38 yards. Justice Hill, 8 carries, only 9 yards. But yes, he did have those 2 touchdowns. I saw he got added in a lot of leagues this week. That surprised me. I'm not really sure how sustainable Justice Hill's goal line carries are going to be. And the reason being is because I don't know that Lamar Jackson has been Lamar Jackson yet. He kind of was contained this past week, only had 6 carries for 32 yards. Then they just called up Melvin Gordon, actually. So I think that might end up being part of the committee if they do have a third guy. Not that I trust Melvin Gordon in a standalone value at all, but just as far as knocking the other 2 guys' value down, I would probably take, if I had to pick one, I would take a speculative ad on Gus Bus, just on the end of your bench, but that's it for me.
Yeah, agreed. I think, the other thing with Baltimore and Justice Hill on the goal line, he didn't have Mark Andrews. So Mark Andrews, if they're on the 3-yard line, he's going to his top target there. He didn't have a ton of big, strong wide receivers on the field at that time, and just went with Justice Hill, the easy route there.
Yeah, and don't forget, when he does have Mark Andrews there, they like to load the box up, and kind of go towards where Mark Andrews would be, and that kind of opens up the lanes for Lamar, and he scores a lot from there. So, we didn't really get to see that in full force, and like I just said, we didn't get to see Lamar be Lamar. It was this new offense that they're trying to work out the kinks of, and throwing more and whatever, and we'll get into Zay Flowers in a little bit. But, I think that now without the running back there, the solid running back for them, it's going to be by committee, and Lamar Jackson's going to end up being the leading rusher, I think.
Agreed.
All right, so we jump into another storyline here that came out of week 1, and it's another injury. And Zach, you have an unhealthy amount of Diontae Johnson on your teams, and he got ruled up for up to 4 weeks, I believe it said.
Yep. Yeah, a few weeks, up to 4. I was sick to my stomach when he went down. I was like, oh my God, he got a great play. There he goes. And he got hurt. I was like, oh, all right. That's a tough one to take. I have Diontae Johnson. I think I have 7 teams, and I think I have Diontae Johnson on 5 or 6 of them. So that hurt me. But I mean, at least it's only a couple weeks. It could be a lot worse. Definitely with the hamstring injury as well. You don't want to rush him back. Right now for Pittsburgh, it's a boost for Pickens, and it's a boost for Allen Robinson, who surprisingly had a really solid game in a really rough outing for Pittsburgh. And I think it's also a boost for Pat Freiermuth, who got in the end zone the other day. I think that's about it. Pittsburgh got absolutely torched on their home field. They have to bounce back from that, and I think they could do it. They got the right pieces with Pickens, Robinson, and Freiermuth out wide.
Yeah, I think for me, as far as the Pickens thing goes, yeah, he'll get an uptick. And what's really surprising about Allen Robinson? Let's take a look at the clip from last week. I'll laugh, but I'm going to say that the one guy who I really think might change a little bit is Allen Robinson. I think that having Allen Robinson there in the slot, using him out wide, it might actually free up guys like Johnson, like Pickens. I think that, ignoring Allen Robinson completely would be a mistake. I think that he's proven that he is talented enough. He just kind of hasn't had the opportunities. There were games where he wasn't even targeted when he was in Los Angeles. I think that if that changes and Kenny Pickett does take that step forward and starts to spread the ball, you're going to see Allen Robinson actually produce some value. Huzzah! Opportunity is here for Allen Robinson. I think that Robinson is going to be a stud, especially if he is in the slot. He got 8 targets last week. I think that was not really that much of a surprise to me. And again, it was just based on what I said. I think that, when he decided to spread the ball around, he was able to free up Allen Robinson. They were focused on guys like Pickens, guys like Diontae Johnson, and you can't really deny that talent, especially when he's over the slot. So that said, he got 8 targets. 7 of them came when he was lined up in the slot. So as long as Allen Robinson is lined up over the middle, I would put him in as a flex option even. But you should definitely add him in any of those leagues because I think the opportunity is here.
I sit back. I was wrong. There's a couple times we'll do that this year, but yeah. This was one of them. I was wrong on Allen Robinson. I actually even dropped him in Dynasty. Did not have a lot of belief in him. I had belief in the other guys.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of the long-term value he'll have, but definitely from the short-term value, I think that this might actually start to reestablish his name, and he's not going to be what he was when he was almost one of the top wide receivers in all of football. But at the same time, I think that this is a pretty good consolation prize.
Yeah, definitely fair.
All right, so now we jump into our next storyline here, and we go into some standouts from last week. And Zach, I think in Miami, they were partying a little bit. Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill just absolutely went off this past week.
Yeah, Tua with 466 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did have an interception and a fumble. We'll forget about that, though, because of those 466 and 3 tutties. I mean, unbelievable what he was able to do. And he paired up with his guy. He has to thank him. 11 receptions on 15 targets, 215 yards, 2 touchdowns. A guy that's going on the list of career highs in fantasy points this past week. If you add Tyreek Hill, you are ecstatic because congratulations, you probably won your game this week, and rightfully so. This guy was a monster, took advantage of a secondary that a lot of people said was pretty good coming into the season, LA, and he absolutely torched them. The run after catch, the yards after catch. I mean, he was a monster the other day, and credit to him. What a guy. And if you picked him in the first round, congrats. You got an absolute star this season.
Yeah, I mean, Tua throwing 466. He went 28 of 45. That's, I mean, like the passing percentage also was pretty good. And then, yeah, Tyreek, I mean, he got 15 targets. We talked about it a little bit in the preseason about how teams are going to channel in on Tyreek. It didn't matter. It didn't matter at all. He still threw to him 15 times, 11 of those caught. 2 scores, 215 yards. I mean, that is awesome. I would say that for Tua, he's definitely a top 10 option going forward. And obviously, knock on wood, let's hope that he stays healthy. That was a lot of fun to watch him go up against a good defense and just pretty much go off. Tyreek right now, I mean, he's the number 1 receiver in all of fantasy. And, over Justin Jefferson. Jefferson had 2 catches in the second half. We'll talk about him in a little bit, and kind of fizzled out towards the end of the game. Tyreek's number 1. He had more points. Ready? Get this stat. Tyreek had more points than Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, T. Higgins, DJ Moore, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin, Odell Beckham Jr., Sky Moore, and Drake London combined. That's pretty amazing.
That is pretty amazing. I mean, it just proves how awful some of those guys were week 1,
yeah.
But also how good Tyreek was. Just a masterclass down in LA.
Yeah, so if you pick Tyreek Hill, yeah, just like Zach said, I mean, you got to be pretty proud because there were guys that were picking him at number 5, and other teams were like, "What? Tyreek at 5?" And he kind of proved it in week 1 that he's definitely worth that kind of value.
Yep, agreed.
Another guy who hauled in a whole lot of targets was Brandon Ayuk. And Zach, listen, we had Brock Purdy pegged as this guy who wasn't going to do too much. But he figured out who his favorite receiver is, and it wasn't Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, and I expected that coming into this year. I think Deebo was more of not a gadget kind of player, but trying to figure things out, maybe some trick plays out of the backfield, and then maybe a couple of receptions out wide. But Ayuk is the pure wide receiver on the outside, and the efficiency was ridiculous the other day. 8 receptions on 8 targets. Every single target, he grabbed the ball in 129 yards plus 2 touchdowns. A monster day for Ayuk. And I mean, this guy, if he was going in 8th, 9th round, some of them 7th, but really 8th or 9th round. I know, Brett, you got him late, kind of late in a draft. And I mean, what he was able to do the other day against Pittsburgh's defense, they have a strong defense. The secondary is a little weak, but I mean, even so, Ayuk, what he was able to do the other day was remarkable. And like I said, the efficiency, 8 receptions on 8 targets.
Yeah, I mean, he caught everything. And obviously 2 touchdowns, and they're going to keep throwing to him. I think that right now he's proven he's the wide receiver 1 on that team, and they're one of the best offenses in the entire league. And yeah, I got him. He was the last round. I just went to go check it out. So yeah, that's pretty good value. And I know that a lot of guys were grabbing him at that spot, round 8, round 9, ish. And then, yeah, obviously round 7, some drafts as well. He's a top 15 option. I think that you're starting him on some teams as your wide receiver 1. Others, depending on your depth, he's the wide receiver 2. But he's a top 15 option right now, which is pretty crazy to say.
That's fair. I'm a little less optimistic. I think I'd probably put him top 25, top 20. But he's still a wide receiver 2, definitely. I just think there's too many mouths to probably feed in that offense that it pushes me down just a tiny bit. But what he did the other day was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think that obviously we talked Deebo and McCaffrey, and so I understand the whole mouths to feed, but listen, if Brock Purdy wants to pick out his favorite guy and just keep throwing him that way, and it's almost like a Cooper Kupp type thing where he's throwing him as many targets. We're going to talk Puka Nacua in a little bit as well. But, if he gets that kind of role, then, yeah, I think it's kind of scary, especially if the efficiency stays to what it was where he's catching literally everything.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so our final standout of the week from week 1 is Aaron Jones. And Zach, it was the Aaron Jones show. As Green Bay, listen, we talked last week if Aaron Rodgers would be able to transfer his ownership on the way out of Lambeau Field to Jordan Love, and it kind of happened. But also, I think he gave a little bit of a stake to Aaron Jones, who also owned the Chicago Bears. Zach, 9 rushes, 41 yards, and a score, but he had 2 catches for 86 yards and another score. You can't really deny that he was awesome.
Yeah, free Aaron Jones. That's what I was saying all week. This guy, he got exactly what I expected from him. Those 9 attempts, 41 yards, and a touchdown. That's good enough for Aaron Jones because you know that the receiving value is going to come in, 2 receptions, and he turned it into 86 yards and another touchdown. An unbelievable player, had a monster week. And like I said, that's what I'm expecting from him. I know AJ Dillon's probably going to get 10 carries as well, but if Aaron Jones can get 10 carries and also add some value in the receiving game, he had the touchdown, the long touchdown from, I think it was over 40 yards. And then he had the other play, which was a screen play. They went opposite side and he just had a ton of room and went down the field, an unbelievable play, and it set up a touchdown. That's exactly what you're expecting from Aaron Jones. He's always going to be a really solid running back 2, maybe a running back 1 for some teams. And he definitely stepped up. A little bit worried about the injury. He did miss practice today, but I'm maybe once we see later in the week, if he's continuing to miss practice, then you get a little worried.
Yeah, and Wednesdays are a little weird because sometimes they do veteran rest days and things like that. Even if they have the injury, they still have to log the injury. So he might have just been getting a rest day, but at the same time he's injured, so they have to log it as, he's got a hamstring issue. And yeah, he got pulled early, and maybe it just had to do with the fact that they were trying to be precautionary because they were up so much, and the game was kind of decided when they pulled him. So you hope for that. But yeah, like you said, track it later in the week, but just from an overall roster rest of season perspective, you're right. He's your top running back on most teams, if not your second guy.
Yeah, and he's going to be a beast for you this season.
Yeah. So now let's jump in to our week 2 preview. And before we jump in, let's just say I want to just make it very clear that a lot of rookies this past week didn't perform to standard. I think that it's very important not to overlook that. It's very early in the season, just because certain guys like, Jahmyr Gibbs, for example, didn't get 35 carries for 215 yards and 3 touchdowns. That doesn't mean that, you're going to be really low on him. I think a lot of these guys are getting their first real exposure to the league. And yeah, they played in the preseason, but to get their real exposure to the league, it's a different speed once all the starters are in there on the other side of the ball. So yeah, I think that don't overlook those guys. I think that that's a very wise thing to do. So let's just jump right in here. Minnesota and Philadelphia. And yeah, there's a rookie right there on Minnesota in Jordan Addison. Zach, what is your thoughts on this game? What are we looking for here?
So I'll start off with Minnesota. It's going to be somewhat of a tough matchup. You have Alexander Mattison probably starting for you as an RB2. Justin Jefferson is going to be shadowed by Darius Slay in this one. And the last time these two met, it was a rough go around for Justin Jefferson standards. So you're not expecting a 35-point game. If he gives you one, of course you'll take it. But I don't think it's going to happen with Slay shadowing him tomorrow night. With Addison, I think this is a sneaky spot because James Bradbury is questionable right now. Some people saying he's unlikely to play. Jordan Addison might have a field day because there's really not a ton behind those top two at cornerback for Philly and Slay and Bradbury. So definitely a guy to look out for. He's probably a low-end flex and maybe you boost him a little bit if Bradbury's out for this one. So a flex play, Addison, who had 4 receptions on 6 targets, 61 yards, and that long touchdown against Tampa last week. And I also think Hawkinson, you're probably going to downgrade them just a tiny bit because they're in Philly and the safeties are pretty strong there. But for Philly, Brett, I mean, it's a good matchup. Minnesota's defense is not great. Hurts, you're going to obviously be starting him. Gainwell is out of there now. I wouldn't start any Philly running back as Gainwell was ruled out for the game. And you're going to keep going forward with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith. And even though Dallas Goedert had that goose egg last week, I still believe he's going to come back and have a solid week as a low-end tight end one because of the matchup against Minnesota.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts. Just from the Minnesota standpoint, I mean, last week, I just spoke about it a few minutes ago. It was a 10-2 half for Justin Jefferson. He looked like an absolute beast in the first half, and in the second half, he only had 2 catches. That's where the improvement, I think, comes from him and from the rest of the team. You saw he was very disappointed at the end of the game as he sat there on the bench. From Addison, though, I mean, listen, he saw a 66% route per drop back, which is not that good. But at the same time, like you just said, he's going to have Slay on Jefferson. I think that Addison right now, like you just said, he's a wide receiver 3 floor. You know, he's that flex play who could walk right into wide receiver 2 production, just, you know, from based on the fact that I think they're going to have to throw him the ball.
Yeah, they definitely need to, and especially with Bradbury out. Yeah.
And then from the Eagles standpoint, I mean, yeah, you just said it. So I'm kind of avoiding the backfield with Gainwell not being there. I think it's going to be very by committee. I think we're going to see Jalen Hurts as the leading rusher this week. I think that's where we're going to see that go. Goddard, yeah, I don't know that you can get any lower than what Goddard was at last week. And so I think that they try to get him involved very much. So last year, Minnesota actually allowed the 4th highest yards per reception, the 9th most receiving touchdowns to tight ends. And, you know, last week, it was just the whole tight end position, I should say, was not good. This is going to be one of those shake it off and get back out there. So, yeah, I'm starting Goddard, you know, and I don't see any reason why anybody should bench Goddard.
Yeah, agreed. I think Philly's got this one in the bag, and just based on Minnesota's defense.
Yep. So now let's jump into our next matchup here. It's Las Vegas at Buffalo. And Zach, the Bills coming off what was a rough go against the Jets. And then Las Vegas coming in, and they have to face the revenge game from Buffalo.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy for Vegas this weekend up in Buffalo. They're going to get like you said, the revenge tour for the Bills after last week's debacle in New York. And, I mean, for Vegas, I'll start off. I think you got to start Josh Jacobs, of course. Even though it's going to be a tough matchup against Buffalo, this run defense, although they were pretty bad last week, I think they'll step it up this week against Vegas. And Jacobs struggled a bit last week against Denver, who also has a solid run defense up front. I think Davante Adams, you got to downgrade him this week because of the shadow that's coming from Tre'Davious White. Obviously, he had one last week, and it wasn't great for him. He went up against Pat Surtain on Denver, and it was a bit of a rough week. Jacoby Myers stepped up massive last week. I don't know if he's going to play. If he does play, probably just a flex guy, nothing more than that. I don't think he's going to play. I mean, it's early in the week, so we'll still have time to figure it out.
Yeah, I think Trey White is definitely going to lock in, especially after last week and, you know, the way that he got almost posterized by Garrett Wilson. And, you know, that's now kind of the viral highlight of the week is that catch. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be one of those lockdown games. I also really think that it's not great news just based on how well the Jets running backs did against the Bills. And I think that the Bills are going to hunker down a bit on the run. So, yeah, I'm not sure that, you know, Josh Jacobs, yeah, obviously you're still starting him because he's Josh Jacobs. But at the same time, I wouldn't expect this huge output. I think it's a tougher matchup than it would have been. Not to say that it would have been an easy matchup regardless, just because the Bills' defense is really good. Yeah, I think Davante Adams, I think that's an interesting point there. As far as the Bills go, Josh Allen, I think that this is a big rebound game for Josh Allen. He took ownership to the turnovers last week. I think that he really liked utilizing his 2 tight ends. So I think we're going to see that a little bit more. So, Kincaid, he's a potential option, flex option if you're in a bind, as well as Dawson Knox, which I thought was kind of surprising. I wasn't really sure what we were going to know about Dawson Knox and his value and all of that. Seems that they're going to go forward with 2 tight ends, and that's okay. Gabe Davis really didn't do anything. He's staying on my bench if I have him. And then James Cook, he was clearly the lead back. He had 16 touches. Damian Harris and Lat Murray combined for just 6 touches. And so for me, I think James Cook right now, he's probably a running back 2 going forward. And he also got 6 targets, which I think is extremely important, very tasty. And just in the sense of like, when that gets to the red zone, if he gets those targets with that blocking, I think that, that he can take some PPR points to the house.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And Allen's going to be a bounce back game for him. For Cook, I think he's a top 20 play this week. Vegas's run defense, not great. Javonte Williams did a good job against them, and so did Samaje Perine last week. Stephon Diggs had a solid week last week, and obviously he's a wide receiver 1 once again. And like you said, the 2 tight ends is an interesting one. If you are in a bind, they're both tight end 2s, Knox and Kincaid, but definitely consider them as flex options against this rough Vegas defense.
Yeah, especially if you're in one of those like tight end premium leagues where there's not a ton of tight ends that are out there. And, that's kind of where I see those 2 guys being utilized a lot.
Yep, definitely.
All right, so jumping into our next matchup, and it's 2 quarterbacks who struggled a little bit last week, one more than the other. Not going to name names here, but from a fantasy perspective, neither really did very well in terms of points. It's Baltimore and Cincinnati. Zach, Jamar Chase didn't really do well. I think all of Cincinnati really didn't do well. Did they bounce back in this one?
Yeah, I mean, it was a rough one for them, but I'm going to blame the weather. I will. I think it was a rough game for them in Cleveland. I will credit the Cleveland Browns as well. Their defense looked like they were the best in football last week. That's how good they were at the dog pound in Cleveland. And I mean, it was a rough one, but I think a bounce back spot for Cincinnati. It's not going to be as easy against this Baltimore defense because they got better over the offseason. They definitely improved, and they were pretty solid last week against Houston. And I mean, for Cincinnati, you got Burrow, of course, with Mixon and Chase and Higgins. You're starting them. I don't think really anything more from Cincinnati's camp. And for Baltimore, it's probably Lamar Jackson. Flowers, you got to put him in. I think he's a flex option. You really just saw from last week the target share that he got. And I know Mark Andrews was out of there, but even so, they're still going to be riding with Zay Flowers this season. He's the wide receiver 1. They're rolling with him. I can't trust Odell right now. I think Flowers has the edge on him. And for Mark Andrews, you had to bench him last week. He was out. Now he comes back, and you're going to expect Mark Andrews things, a top 3 play at the tight end position this weekend.
Yeah, I think that when you said the top defense in the league, the Dallas Cowboys would like to have a word after their dismantling on Sunday Night Football and the amount of points that they scored in fantasy and probably determined a lot of outcomes in games. But I joke. Jamar Chase, though, the 4th worst performance in his entire career. I would counter that by saying that out of his bottom 5 games in his career, 3 of those came against the Cleveland Browns. I think that that's a very important thing. They lock down on him. They double him pretty much every time he runs out for a route. And so, yeah, obviously he wasn't able to get it done. I think this will become one of those bounce back games for pretty much everybody, like you just said, and you're starting all those guys, T and Joe Mixon and Burrow, obviously. From Baltimore, it should be interesting, though. Last week, we went through our storylines for each team. Go check that episode out if you haven't already. But Zay Flowers answered our question, who is the number 1? It's him. He's the number 1. He got 10 targets, 21 for the entire team, and he got 10 of them. So that's pretty great. There's a Mark Andrews. Obviously, he wasn't there. I don't know that that's going to have that much of an impact on the wide receiver 1. He's still going to be a volume monster, especially now as we start to go more into this passing offense that Lamar is being told to do. So I think that it actually will help Mark Andrews. And now that he's back and he's healthy, he practiced today. And while Lamar didn't have a ton of points, like I just said before, there's no running back really. It's running back by committee. I think the leading rusher is going to be Lamar Jackson. And so I see a big game coming ahead.
Yeah, and just quickly, Baltimore obviously only 21 targets last week. That was because they were up in the game. It was Houston. They were kind of controlling that one. Now they add Mark Andrews back. You know they're going to be throwing the ball, especially in Cincinnati, who's going to be putting up points. And just quickly, Jamar Chase, you mentioned those 3 games against Cleveland. Yep. A quick shout out to Denzel Ward because that's all him right there.
Yeah, completely. And just shadows and again, those double teams, and he couldn't get anything. No room at all. I think that Cleveland really does a good job of locking down on him. And anytime he plays Cleveland, look out. You're probably not going to have a good week from Jamar.
Agreed.
All right, so jumping into another team that kind of struggled last week, it was the Kansas City Chiefs as they take the loss on opening night to the Detroit Lions. They will travel this week to Jacksonville to take on Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Zach, take us through if the Chiefs can bounce back, and who's the number 1 receiver out there?
It's weird because there really isn't one. I mean, I think the number 1 receiver is Travis Kelce. Obviously, yeah. I mean, Rashee Rice had a solid game. He got the touchdown. I mean, a couple other guys stood up. Sky Moore didn't have a good game. Kadarius Toney didn't have a good game. You're not starting any of them. This week, it's Mahomes, Isaiah Pacheco, who did a great job last week and surprised me a tiny bit with the work that he got in the passing game. I mean, I'm expecting Jerick McKinnon to come in, maybe CEH to come in for those hands. Nope, Isaiah Pacheco, and that's huge for him. I think that boosts him up from a top 30 play to edging towards top 20 if he can keep up that passing game value. I mean, it's huge for him. But I think it's Mahomes, Pacheco, and Kelce for Kansas City. For Jacksonville, Lawrence, Etienne, and Calvin Ridley. What a week for him. I'll give you credit on that one also, Brett. Making him, he's probably a wide receiver 1 now. That's how good he played the other day. With the other 2 guys, Zay Jones and Evan Ingram, I'm giving Zay Jones maybe a flex play. I think Christian Kirk has dropped, and maybe that's hurtful to one of my rosters with Christian Kirk. But Zay Jones, 5 receptions on 7 targets, 55 yards, and an unreal touchdown catch. I mean, that's flex numbers right there. And you could slot him in if you need him. And Evan Ingram, I think it's going to be a bit of a bounce back game for him. He struggled a tiny bit just based on everybody else was getting targets last week.
Yeah, from the Jaguars perspective, I think that, Calvin Ridley, like you just said, he's like a wide receiver 1, 2, right in that range. And again, that was another guy that was slipping a lot in drafts. And if you picked him, you kind of rewarded there. And yeah, I think that really the guy who got hurt by that was Christian Kirk, which is kind of what we predicted back then, that if Calvin Ridley did have the kind of output, that it would affect Christian Kirk. And so he had 1 catch, 9 yards. You're benching him. I'm not dropping him yet, but he's right there on the border of what might happen over the next couple of weeks. As far as the Kansas City thing goes, it's an interesting case of like who is the one, and that's why I asked that question. And yeah, it's Kelce, because I'm not sure that you can crown any of the wide receivers the wide receiver 1. Rashee Rice for me, he's a deeper ad right now, just based on the fact that he did score a touchdown. We'll see if it continues this week with the trust between him and Mahomes. And we talked about when he got drafted, the guy asking for him to get drafted was Patrick Mahomes. I think that says a lot, and that the trust level there, and he sees the talent. Tony's still a wild card to me. I'm very unsure of what he is yet. I have him. I picked him in the last round in a redraft league. I have him in a dynasty league. Obviously, dynasty, I'm not dropping him. He's young and all of that. From the redraft perspective, though, I'm not dropping him yet. I think that if you look at the numbers behind it, his usage rate was through the roof. And I think that that's a huge thing. The fact that he was out there on all the routes. If you actually watch some of the drops and you look and you analyze the play, there were some other factors, like ball was thrown behind him on one. There was a receiver blocking his view on one. So, yeah, there was one that was blatantly right at him. He should have caught it. And that to me was like the, oh my God, what are we doing here kind of moment. But at the same time, I'm not starting him. I'm not flexing him. He's sitting at the end of my bench. And right now he's just a stash. And if he rebounds, great. And if he doesn't rebound, then, we'll have to, determine what to do at the end of the week, see if there's better options out there. Pacheco, I love Isaiah Pacheco. He was one of those guys that I actually traded in the offseason as one of those sell high. I'm not sure that his value is going to dip though. So it's a sell high, but his value is going to stay that same volume. And it's because of the passing downs. I think that play in the Super Bowl really did a lot for his passing game options. And so for me, Pacheco, I think going forward, he's going to end up being one of those guys that stays as one of your mid-tier running backs and, running back 2, 3, whatever you want to call him. But he's probably in your lineup on most teams.
Yeah, I agree with you. And people should start him. It's not going to be an easy matchup this week against Jacksonville, especially on the road. But if he's getting some receptions out of the backfield, you got to put him in your lineup.
Yeah, lastly, I just want to touch on the running back room in Jacksonville. ETN and Tank Bigsby. Listen, Tank Bigsby, it seems like he's going to be one of those touchdown vultures for ETN. Maybe a sneaky ad in one of those deeper kind of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would say so in deeper leagues, but he's mainly probably similar to what Zeke Elliott's doing in New England. And ETN's going to get most of those downs just like Ramondre.
Yeah, completely. Just, one of those guys who's just not on anybody's radar right now. And obviously he should be because he's the guy scoring the touchdowns.
Yep.
All right, so now we jump into our next matchup, and it is the LA Chargers traveling to Tennessee. Zach, listen, when it came to the snap count in Tennessee, Tyjae Spears played 56% of the snaps over Derrick Henry. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's a rough one. I didn't draft Derrick Henry this year. I stayed away kind of from Derrick Henry, but you're still starting Derrick Henry. He's Derrick Henry. And although it's going to be it's an okay matchup against LA, I think you got to put Henry in your lineup as a running back one. He's nothing lower than that. He can't be with just what he's able to do. He can break out for 300 yards like whenever he wants, it seems. I think when you look at DeAndre Hopkins, probably pretty good from what you expected to start this season. I mean, he got a fair amount of targets and did the job with them. Obviously, he's going to be Tannehill's top guy. Chigakonko would probably stay away from for right now. Just seeing things go at the start of the season. Okonkwo struggled a tiny bit last week. That's credit to the safeties down in New Orleans. But Hopkins with Lattimore on him and still had a solid day. I think you got to be happy with that with Tennessee.
Yeah, completely. I think that, D-Hop, he turned 13 targets into 7 catches, 65 yards. He's a low-end wide receiver too, I think, and, the potential that becomes more. Now he's going to go up against the Chargers, and, they got a good pass rush, and so we'll see how quickly they can get the ball out. The run blocking wasn't amazing this past week, and the pass blocking wasn't that much better. So I'm curious to see if they can get the ball out quickly and how far they're going to be able to throw it to DeAndre Hopkins. Are they going to have to use a lot of short yardage gains before going over the top? As far as the Tyjae Spears thing, listen, Tyjae played 56% of the snaps. Henry got 47% of the snaps. However, it's a little misleading. Henry still led 15-3 in carries. I'm not buying it. If I have Henry, I'm keeping him. I'm not selling him off. Starting week, Derrick Henry still kind of proving that a little bit of the past game, and so that was an interesting little nugget there. As far as the Chargers go, listen, I think the interesting thing here is Josh Kelly is going to have a little bit of value here. Eckler is nursing an ankle injury right now. Kelly had 16 carries for 91 yards and a touchdown. I think he's an interesting flex play this week, especially if Eckler is in any way incapacitated.
Yeah, I agree with you, and something to look out for because Eckler with those injuries, and I feel like you could probably slot Kelly in as maybe an RB2 if Eckler's out.
Yeah.
Obviously, Eckler's a top 3 play if he's in, but Kelly definitely has some value if Eckler has to miss this one.
Yeah, and just lastly, again, like I said, Quentin Johnston, like first time in, I'm not really looking too far to it. Yeah, it was a little concerning that Mike Williams did get hurt, and then he still didn't really get targets. But at the same time, it is what it is, and obviously he's just getting acclimated. So I'm looking for Quentin Johnston to have a pretty good year overall. It's only 1 week, but this is a pretty good transition into our next matchup. And it was Drake London with 0 points, and it was Kyle Pitts with 1 catch. And I'm not really sure what Arthur Smith is doing. I understand that he really likes to lean into the run, and he got Bijan, and Tyler Algier is going to be a thing, and that's great. I mean, I'm just flabbergasted at the fact that you picked Drake London so high in the draft, and they picked Kyle Pitts so high in the draft, the NFL draft I'm talking about, and they're not really utilizing them at all. And then when Arthur Smith was asked about it, it's like, I'll leave that to the fantasy football people. So shout out to all of us, the fantasy football people, who are like, what are you doing? I'm relegating London out of my bench just until I see something that says, hey, we're going to actually throw the ball. Yeah, it's not going to be like that every single game the whole year, but at the same time, like, it's just very confusing to me. And yeah, obviously there'll be games where Atlanta goes down and need to throw the ball, but if they're in a close game, they're probably just going to stick to the run, you would think.
Yeah, I mean, why not? This backfield is monstrous right now with Bijan and Tyler Algier. Obviously, I'm as a Bijan owner in both Dynasty and Redraft, I'm happy with what he did last week. Obviously, there could be more, but I know that there's a long season ahead, and obviously Algier got a ton of carries. He did. He 15 attempts and 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. Bijan, on the other hand, had a touchdown as well, a nasty juke move around a Carolina defender, and still put up really solid numbers throughout the game. The biggest thing was the 6 receptions that he got out of the backfield. That's perfect. That's why Bijan is rated so highly this year, is the work in the passing game. And obviously that means a lower share for the guys out wide in Drake London and Kyle Pitts as well. It's not going to get any easier this week, Brett. I hate to say it, because London's going to be shadowed by Jair Alexander up in Green Bay. And I mean, they're in Atlanta, but Alexander, a really strong corner out wide. And I would say I probably agree with you. London's a bench play right now, probably a very low-end flex. If there's nothing you can really do about it, you got Drake London, and okay, I got to throw him in my lineup. That's understandable. But for Kyle Pitts, probably the same. Low-end tight end 1. If you got somebody else, like I actually have a decision. I have David Njoku on my team. It's a decision of whether you go Pitts or Njoku, and that's a question mark down in Atlanta.
Yeah, just quickly on Green Bay, because we already touched on the running back room, but Jordan Love's not really that bad of a sleeper option as one of those backup quarterbacks you can stash on your bench. Maybe use him as a streamer later on in the bye week. He's 50-27, 245 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also rushed 3 times for 12 yards. So obviously, a little dabble here with rushing ability. He didn't have Christian Watson, so I think that's an important thing to note. So you started to see him get comfortable.
Yeah, agreed. And Watson, if he plays, he's obviously in your lineup, a wide receiver 2. And Dobbs is definitely a flex play with what he was able to do in the end zone last week.
Yep. So now jump into our next matchup. It is Seattle at Detroit. Zach, Detroit had an amazing opening game with the 2 running backs, and I think it's going to be Monty to the moon here. 21 carries, 74 yards, and a touchdown. I also think that there's going to be some more work for Jahmyr Gibbs. He had only 7 carries, 42 yards, 2 catches for 18. I'm starting both of these guys.
Agreed. I think they're both RB2s. I mean, Monty a little bit less, but I mean, probably a RB2 flex. I think that's
Yeah.
probably where he's slotted. I mean, Goff is definitely a start consideration if you're in a hole and maybe one of your guys went down, Aaron Rodgers went down, and he was your starter. Then you got Jared Goff. I mean, that kind of situation, I think it's going to be a really good matchup, especially with what Matthew Stafford was able to do to this Seattle defense a week ago. And Amon-Ra obviously starting a top 10 wide receiver. And Sam Laporta, watch out for him. I had some solid targets in week 1 against Kansas City. I think it's going to be another solid game for him.
Yeah, and there's a couple guys who are banged up on the Seahawks in the secondary, and so I think that they kind of try to take advantage of that. I also think that, listen, they did a good job against Mahomes, Detroit, and so for me, Geno is not a quarterback one. He's probably that like borderline guy, maybe a super flex option. Like I would start him as my super flex quarterback 2. But yeah, he's probably a borderline just based on the fact that they're going against Mahomes. They did pretty well against him.
Yeah, that's fair. And Metcalf's probably going to have a solid game. He did so last week. Lockett's a bit of a question mark for me, especially with the health concerns.
Agree. And Jackson Smith-Njigba actually came back. He caught a pass, even though he was wearing a brace. And so, yeah, I think that, there can be some upside later on in the season. And I'm not sure how much there's going to be that for right now. So, he's one of those stash candidates, especially in redraft.
Yep, definitely.
So a guy who we were talking about for many weeks, Anthony Richardson, and he exceeded my expectations. I didn't think he was going to end up being a top 10 play, but I think for right now, he is a top 10 play. He threw the ball 37 times, which that was the most surprising thing to me, is that they threw the ball that many times, and he mixed in the run. For me, I think that Richardson really did surprise me in the sense of I thought he was going to be good this year. I didn't think he was going to be that good. Also, obviously there were some quarterback struggles this week, and so may have pushed him up the rankings just from that standpoint. So, he probably could have finished 12, 13 range. But he does finish as a top 10 quarterback. That's pretty interesting. The one note that I have, though, from the run, he's going to start to have to run the ball more because I'm not sure that we can really trust Deion Jackson. I
agree with you 100%. And Richardson, I don't think he's getting that many attempts every game. I think that this was a somewhat of a game where they were just playing catch up for most of it. And yeah, you're going to have some of those games, but I don't think they're going to put that much on his hands while also giving him all those runs. I think they relied on Deion Jackson probably for a week here, but I think Richardson's going to need to take those carries. One guy that surprised me a lot was Michael Pittman. 8 receptions on 11 targets, 97 yards, and that touchdown down the sideline. He's probably a flex play for me, maybe a wide receiver too, depending on where you have him on your roster. I don't know if he could keep this up for the rest of the season, but I will give him the credit because Anthony Richardson had a ton of attempts in this one, and Michael Pittman is the number one guy for him.
Yeah, completely. I think that, Pittman, for me, at least, I thought that he had some value. Again, he exceeded my expectations the same way that Richardson did. I think that pair of guys, they're going to do well together this season. If you got Richardson on your team, you're rolling him out this week because I think he'll be okay, especially because he's playing against the Houston Texans. And, we jump into them. I texted you during the game, and I was like, he's okay. He's running for his life, though. That was what I really noticed was he wasn't getting a ton of, protection at all. So, the line would break down, or half of the line would break down every single play, and it was the non-Tunsil side. It would just break down, and so I think that's going to be the big struggle for him. He's going to have to learn how to scramble because otherwise this could be a long year. That's my big takeaway for the week, though. I mean, Stroud, for me, he's off the radar, off the fantasy radar. Pierce, though, he rushed 11 times for 38 yards, 2 of the targets for 9 yards. It was an okay game. Singletary really didn't factor into him. So Pierce for me, yeah, he's probably running back 2. I think he'll bounce back a little bit against Indy, but at the same time, like, I'm not very excited about him.
Completely fair. One thing I want to point out is it is a good matchup for Houston, and Nico Collins did pretty solid last week. I will say 6 receptions on 11 targets for 80 yards. It's a good matchup against Indy. If you got him on your roster, maybe plug him in as a flex play. He could definitely have a good week this week as Stroud's number 1 option.
Yeah, it should be also noted that Noah Brown got put on the IR today, and they actually had John Mechie in the practice. So should be hopefully excited to see him maybe come back as he continues his recovery from leukemia, his comeback tour, and maybe can get into his first NFL game. That would be pretty exciting as well. He's a second-year player, but this is his rookie year. So yeah, that should be pretty exciting. But yeah, I think Nico Collins will probably get a little more work, especially with Noah Brown not there.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so jumping into our next matchup, and Zach, is Baker Mayfield a legitimate quarterback? Because he looked like one last week.
I mean, he did, but I'm going to pump the brakes just a sec because he was playing the Minnesota Vikings, who defense I just cannot trust.
Fair. I mean, the big question mark for me, though, from a fantasy perspective, is Rachaad White. He wasn't the most efficient runner. Chicago, listen, they struggled last week against the Packers running back. So, yeah, there's a path to him getting in there. But at the same time, there's also a path for Sean Tucker, the backup rookie, who, could potentially become the number 1 in the future. And it just goes down to the efficiency and whether or not they can actually give Tucker a chance at some carries. And I think that he could start to creep in a little bit. I don't know that it's going to be this week, though, just based on the fact that Chicago really struggled against the Packers running backs.
Yeah, and I would probably put White where I put him at the start of the season. He's an RB3 for me. I don't think he's any higher than that. Some people have him as an RB2. I think, it's a bit of a boost for him, but I think he's an RB3. And Godwin and Evans did pretty solid with Baker last week. They each had a pretty solid game. Obviously, Evans got the touchdown. Another rookie got a touchdown as well. As for Chicago, Justin Fields, it was a rough one against Green Bay, but it's not going to get easier against Tampa Bay, but you're still starting him as your starting quarterback. Khalil Herbert's probably the guy in this offense, but I would watch out for Roschon Johnson coming in, maybe taking some carries in a couple of weeks. And for DJ Moore, it's going to be a tough one. He's got Carlton Davis on him, shadowing him this week. For Cole Kmet, 5 receptions, 44 yards. Solid low end tight end 1, high end or high end tight end 2, excuse me.
Yeah, I think for the Chicago backfield, it's clearly by committee. It's something that we spoke about that we knew what would happen. That said, I think Herbert's the one to start. I'm really not that confident in him, though, other than the flex play. And then obviously Roland Jones, I think that's pretty obvious. And then, yeah, I like Cole Kmet. I think that Cole Kmet's a sneaky little option there just as a tight end. And if he's out there in your league, you probably should add him.
Yep, agreed.
All right, so jumping on to the team that had one of the biggest debacles in the history of primetime games, the New York Giants. And, Zach, they get to travel to Arizona to take a team on who's also struggling.
Yeah, maybe a blessing in disguise for the Giants offense, the Giants defense. It could help them out this week. But Daniel Jones is probably, I would say, a high-end QB2. I think that's probably where he slots in, just on the outskirts of QB1 because of what he was able to do with his legs. He really did a good job. And yes, he was passing a lot, but he got out of the pocket, was scrambling a ton against Dallas. And that's some good fantasy points for a quarterback. So definitely a guy to look out for this week against Arizona. Saquon, of course, you're starting him. It was a bit of a rough week last week, but I expect to bounce back against this Arizona defense. And Darren Waller got some targets and what you kind of expected in the passing game and had some big plays. He probably was the most promising of anybody in this Giants offense. So Waller is going to be your tight end one this week and a guy to look out for in this matchup. I would say for Arizona, it's a solid matchup for them as well. The Giants defense really struggled last week, and obviously they were down for a large portion of the game. But Arizona is going to have a couple solid matchups. James Conner, you're going to be starting him this week against this Giants defense. And Hollywood Brown, even though Josh Dobbs is the quarterback, he's gotten a fair amount of the targets, and he does have a pretty solid matchup against a weak secondary for the New York Giants.
Yeah, I think that for the guys that added Josh Dobbs, I'm sorry that you added him. He finished with like 2 points. I'm just saying. I do like Daniel Jones, though. I think Daniel Jones is a good super flex option. I agree with you with what you said in terms of the rushing ability. I really want to focus, though, on both teams here with the tight ends. I think that the tight ends are very interesting. Darren Waller, he caught 3 of his 5 targets for 36 yards. Listen, that was a success in what was an unsuccessful offensive night for the Giants. Look for that to be more successful this week. I think that for me, he's at least a top 5 tight end play. I think that he is going to be a volume guy. And then you look at the other side of the field, Zach Ertz, he had 10 targets. And so 6 of them for 6 catches for 21 yards. They weren't a lot. It was a good safety valve, though, for Josh Dobbs. Listen, if they can move the ball down the field and they get to the red zone, I think that there could be an Ertz touchdown in the works. And so I would put Ertz on the radar, at least roster him as a speculative guy. I don't really see Trey McBride having that much of an impact right now. I think this is the Ertz show. And so maybe Trey McBride later on in the season comes back around, but I actually dropped him in Dynasty earlier today, picking up Puka Nacua, and I think that's a pretty good transition into our next matchup.
Yeah, agreed.
So jumping in, and it's the Rams against the San Francisco 49ers. And Zach, listen, we got to start with Puka Nacua. Wow. I mean, 15 targets. I'm not really sure that this is going to be a fluke.
Yeah, it's not going to be, I don't think. But I'm also going to pump the brakes just a sec, because congratulations, Puka Nacua. You're probably the top waiver ad this week. But after those 10 receptions for 119 yards on 15 targets, you beat the best defense in the NFL. And that's the San Francisco 49ers. They're going to be absolutely clamping down on this guy this week. They said, oh, well, all right, that's their offense. We're going to be rolling it. We'll let them do whatever they want, but we will send 2 guys at Puka Nacua, because who else is there? Who do they got?
Yeah, I mean, there's Van Jefferson, and I think we kind of assumed that it was going to be Jefferson, and part of me feels like it's just from the sense that we all knew him, we all saw him play, and so everyone's like, oh, he must be the one. I mean, Puka Nacua was the guy that we actually talked up back when we were talking rookies, and I had him pegged as like a mid-round rookie pick, and it was kind of interesting how McVay spoke about him in the press conferences and all that. I did not see 15 targets coming in week 1. But I really don't know that this is going to be a fluke. I think he's going to be the guy, at least for now. And when Cooper Kupp comes back, I think that he might actually have a pretty significant role. But yeah, Puka Nacua, to quote the incomparable Matthew Berry over the last couple of days, it means no worries. Hakuna Matata. So, Puka Nacua. But yeah, I think that he's going to be a pretty good option. I'm a little scared on the Cam Akers front, just because we're not really sure what's going on with Cam Akers and Kyron Williams, and it seems that Kyron Williams is getting the more efficient carries, even though Cam Akers got more carries later on down the stretch. So very unsure at the running back situation right now. I'm actually going to probably bench Cam Akers just till we figure that out, because the water is a little bit muddy on that one. As far as San Francisco, though, they had their own stud, Brandon Ayuk. I mean, you're putting him in your lineup if you had him. We just spoke about him earlier. I wouldn't be shocked if they channel in on him, the Rams. But you're not going to convince me that I have to bench a guy who just put up an absolute amazing stat line.
That's true. I mean, they're going to zero in on them, but their secondary, although it was pretty good last week against Seattle, this secondary is still very young. We talked about that a lot. For Nakua, Brett, he's a low-end flex. I wouldn't probably play him even if I had him because of the matchup. And I think the same for Kyron Williams and Cam Akers. I'm benching both of them. They're going up against San Fran. It's going to be a tough matchup. They're not going to put up a ton of points. I think I'd stay away from the Rams this week.
Yeah, I mean, there's no worries. So just stash him. I think that's it. I'm going to stash him this week. And listen, if he gets another 15 targets, he'll probably be in my lineup next week. But if you got him on waivers, that's awesome. Don't overreact to the fact that he got 15 targets last week and throw him in over one of your top guys. And, he's in over Jamar Chase. Like that doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So jumping into our next matchup, it is the New York Jets led by quarterback Zach Wilson in his first start of the year as he takes on a pretty good defense, the Dallas Cowboys, who finished with upwards of 40 points depending on what your scoring was in your league. And again, they decided pretty much every fantasy matchup this past week.
Yeah, I mean, these two defenses just absolutely hate fantasy football, it seems like. I don't know. Yeah. I don't think they're fans of it. I mean, it's going to be a tough one to really feel comfortable with the Jets. I mean, you look at it, Cook and Hall, they're flex plays, but I'm also very worried about this Dallas front that did a good job keeping Saquon in check, even though there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver for Saquon, especially with them down in that game. I mean, for Wilson, he's going to have Trevon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore going on him. I don't think there's going to be a shadow from either one of them, but I think they're both going to be on him. They're going to both have their share on Garrett Wilson. He's still a top 15 play, but you're just going to bump it down the expectations this week. I don't expect them to go off, especially now, like we mentioned, with Zach Wilson at the helm. For Dallas, it's Pollard and Lamb, and I think that's about it because the Jets defense on the other side is really tough. Did a good job against the Bills last week. And I mean, although Stephon Diggs did a really solid job against Sauce Gardner last week in terms of fantasy, CeeDee Lamb could do the same, but I would bump down expectations once again for him as well.
Yeah, this is just a scary matchup on all fronts from both sides. It is what it is. Again, like we talked about, Breece and Dalvin, there's the uptick. Breece only played 17 snaps. That's another stat that I didn't really give before. That is insanity to me, is that he only played 17 snaps and turned in an absolute amazing performance. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be an uptick. I'm probably playing both of them, even though in that flex kind of role. But interesting matchup there. Garrett Wilson, you're obviously starting him as well. I mean, is this one of those games where you start Allen Lazard or one of those second guys? Probably not, just based on what you said. They're probably not going to, channel in on Garrett Wilson with one guy. They'll kind of spread it around a bit. So, you're going to have the Stephon Diggs. You're going to have Stephon Gilmore lurking out there. And so, yeah, I mean, listen, as far as the offense goes in Dallas, though, it was kind of scary last week just based on the fact that they barely got on the field. So a lot of the stat lines were not really that great. Like Dak didn't have a great line. CD didn't have a great line, with the exception of Pollard. So as far as it goes, I'm going to say pretend that last week didn't happen as far as the Dallas offense goes, with the exception of Pollard, which obviously we figured out Pollard is going to get his workload and all that. Play them as usual. You're starting CD. You're looking to start Dak, even in a tough matchup. I think, I would start the Dallas guys as usual. That said, I think the other thing with CD, just to focus in on him, we saw the production that Stephon Diggs was able to get on Sauce. I think that CD uses a little bit of that tape. Yeah,
I completely agree.
All right, so just quickly to jump through these last couple matchups here, our last 425 matchup, Washington against Denver. And Zach, listen, Javonte Williams or Samaje Perine, who's the one here?
It's Javonte Williams from what he did last week. Oh my goodness. The targets. I mean, we talked about Pacheco a little bit ago. Javonte Williams is getting those targets in his first game back after a massive injury. I mean, you got to start Javonte, probably a low end RB2, maybe a flex. I think he's in that spot right there. Judy, we still have to see if he's going to play in this one. He's questionable right now, but Sutton is a flex depending on Judy. He had 4 receptions on 5 targets, 32 yards and a touchdown. Not great, but he got the touchdown to definitely boost his value. Like I said, he's a flex at best if Judy can't make it. For Washington, Brian Robinson getting more targets than Antonio Gibson. If somebody told me that to start the season, I would call you crazy. Brian Robinson, he's an RB3 right now. He's a really solid option. They just throw him in your lineup. Although Denver had a pretty solid game against Josh Jacobs, they got a good run defense. I'd still probably take a shot on Robinson if he's getting that volume. McLaurin is going to get a shadow from Pat Surtain. Look for Jahan Dotson. I picked him last week as my lock of the week. I didn't pick him this week, but there's an opportunity for him to break out this week.
Yeah, listen, as far as Brian Robinson goes, I mean, he's the guy. I'm not sure that I trust him that much yet. I think they could always go back to Gibson, and we're unsure of that. So I need to see the more consistent, Brian Robinson. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable that the guy, he came off being shot last year, came back in the middle of the season and kind of hit the ground running. And now full camp in the, bank, and now he's the guy. So I think they're getting now what they wanted week 1 last year, which is exciting. Denver did shut down Josh Jacobs, though. I think that's something to be noted. So again, I'm probably leaving him on my bench, at least if I think that there might be some better flex plays that I have on my lineup. And then, Javonte's the one. I mean, listen, it wasn't like Samaje Perine didn't do anything. He still rushed 8 times, 41 yards. He got 4 targets, which I thought was interesting as well. And so there was a little bit of a split from that perspective. So that's a little confusing. But at the same time, like Samaje Perine's not going to have the long-term value. I think that's pretty, certain. Javonte, though, full workload, I think, coming right out of the gate. So that was pretty exciting to see as well. I'm going to start that guy. I'm probably not going to start Samaje Perine, though.
Yeah, I'm staying away from Perine as well.
Yeah. So now let's just jump into our Sunday night matchup, Miami versus New England. Zach, we spoke about Tyreek Hill. I think personally, this is going to be a Waddle game coming. I think that Bill Belichick loves to take away the best thing that a team has. And I think for them, that's the over-the-top throws and just Tyreek Hill in general. I think that this will be a big game for Jalen Waddle.
I can't blame you. And Waddle was solid last week. It wasn't great because Tyreek got a ton of targets. I wouldn't be shocked if Waddle had a really solid game, especially up in New England. It's going to be tough against this defense. And like you said, Bill Belichick loves to take away the number one guy and the best thing about a team, and that is Tyreek Hill after week 1. Mostert, I'm probably staying away. I think he's a flex option at best. Just based on matchup, it's not going to be easy for him. For New England, Ramondre, it was a rough week last week, just based on not a lot going on, but I think he's definitely a RB2 right now, maybe an RB1 for some people. I think Hunter Henry is a guy to watch out for. He's probably a low-end flex right now, just based on what he was able to do last week. 5 receptions on 6 targets, 56 yards, and the touchdown. A solid guy to maybe keep on the radar if Mac Jones keeps going to him at the tight end position.
Interesting note on Mostert. He actually didn't practice today. And again, it's that murky line. We're not really sure about rest days versus injury days, and it's Wednesday. So, something to follow later on in the week. So it's pretty interesting. But at the same time, I think from the New England perspective, Kendrick Bourne, I think, is a nice deeper league option. But again, I saw him added in a ton of leagues this week. and his percentage went up on Yahoo, on ESPN, and I don't really see that as a long-term option. I think that he got some red zone points that kind of boosted his score. Not sure how sustainable it's going to be with Mac Jones, and I just really don't trust that. I will say, though, that Hunter Henry did have a nice game, 5 for 56 with a touchdown. But for me, the takeaway from New England just was the fact that Ramondre has that thorn in his side that we kind of saw coming with Zeke. Zeke had 7 carries for 29, had 5 catches for 14 yards receiving. Ramondre with 12 carries for 25, 6 for 64 in receiving. And so, yeah, it's that little bit of a thorn in the side, and it wasn't as many of the red zone carries for Zeke. It just kind of, he was all over the field at the same time as Ramondre. So, yeah, I think it took a little bit of a hit to Ramondre. That said, he's still probably your low-end running back too, just at the moment. And, yeah, I mean, we'll see if they expand Zeke's role, he'll go lower. And if not, then Ramondre will go higher. But it wasn't exactly an exciting week to have Ramondre Stevenson.
Yeah, I agree with you, and something to keep an eye on in future weeks.
Yeah, completely. So now we actually have one of, I believe it's 3 different weeks that we're going to have this season. Monday Night Football has 2 games. That should be pretty exciting. One coming at 7:15, the other one coming at 8:15, which is wonderful because the games are not going to end super, super late. So we start with the first game. That is New Orleans versus Carolina. Zach, we come in. Bryce Young had his debut, and now he's got to go play against the Saints defense. A pretty tough challenge for a young kid.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy one, and I think not one person from this Carolina team is on the fantasy radar except for the running back. That's Miles Sanders, because of the workload he's going to get at the running back position. I don't think it's going to be great because New Orleans defense is pretty tough, but if I had to start somebody in this Carolina team, it would probably be Miles Sanders. As for New Orleans, Jamal Williams, it's a question if Kendre Miller is going to come back. I'm going to speak about Jamal Williams a bit later. I think it's a all go for him, especially with what Atlanta did to this Carolina defense last week. Olave is going to be a wide receiver 1 this week, probably, or maybe a high-end wide receiver 2 for some people. Solid numbers last weekend, 8 receptions for 112 yards. That's exactly what you want from him. And Michael Thomas, Brett, if he stays healthy, he's a flex option in this New Orleans offense with Carr at quarterback. 5 receptions on 8 targets, 61 yards. Solid numbers. Like I said, he's a flex option. We'll see what's going on with other guys. And also Jawan Johnson is another guy who's probably a flex option this week, just based on a juicy matchup going up against Carolina.
I told you, Michael Thomas is going to be a thing. If he can stay healthy, this is a guy that got talked up by his quarterback, his new quarterback, when he first got to New Orleans. And yeah, it's kind of crazy that Michael Thomas is going to actually be a legitimate thing this year. Yeah, I mean, you're starting all your normal guys. The only guy I would add to Carolina, though, was Hayden Hurst, who I think has become the safety valve. And yeah, Adam Thielen was hurt, so maybe that changes things a little bit. But it seemed that Bryce needed a safety valve, and it ended up being Hayden Hurst this week. So we'll see if Adam Thielen being healthy changes it. But yeah, quite the test for the kid on Monday Night Football, his first primetime game, and he's got to go up against New Orleans.
Yeah, just the one thing I'm a little bit worried about Hayden Hurst with the matchup. That's why I kind of stayed away.
Fair. Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. Definitely fair. I would probably stay. He's one of those borderline guys. If you have a tight end premium league, then maybe you look at that in your flex option there.
Yep, definitely.
And then we wrap up with one team that did really well, one team that didn't do really well at all. Cleveland Browns and Pittsburgh Steelers. Zach, Deshaun Watson, though, he didn't do that well, even though he led his team to victory.
Yeah, the passing yards was really kind of what hurt last week. The rushing ability was great. That's something that I was looking to maybe see from Deshaun Watson. Did he still have those legs? He definitely did, and he still has that rushing ability. But if he's going to be a top 10 quarterback and maybe that upside in the top 5, he's going to need to sling the ball around a little bit more. Obviously, based on game script last week, it was kind of tough to do so. They were already up in the game and they didn't really want to cause too many turnovers from their offense. So that's something to look out for. But Chubb had a solid week. Cooper, you're going to start him, even though it was a bit of a rough one last week. And then Njoku, you're also going to probably be starting him as a low-end tight end 1, high-end tight end 2 against this Pittsburgh defense. And the secondary is not great for Pittsburgh. The front line, the pass rush, is pretty difficult. So Watson's going to probably have to figure that out this week.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Watson, listen, there were a lot of like 15-yard outs that were happening. He was one-hopping them, and that, to me, that scared me. I'm not very confident in him at all. And, yeah, if you have him in super flex, that might be your only option of starting a guy like Deshaun Watson. But, yeah, it really did disappoint me this past week. Chubb, though, he rushed 18 times for 106 yards. He caught 4 targets for 21 yards, and that was all of his targets. So that was pretty good. Working into the passing game, kind of like what we were talking about a little bit with, Kareem Hunt and not being there. The Niners just ran through these guys. So for me, Chubb's a top 5 play. I think that this is going to be a monster week for him. I mean, Pittsburgh, we don't have to roll the tape again of the Allen Robinson clip from last week. But again, if he is playing in the slot, I'm putting him in as a flex option each and every week. I mean, obviously the unknown is this week, but, it kind of depends on your lineup of whether or not you're going to put him in and stick with the unknown. I probably would stash him in a deeper lineup, but he's definitely an ad for me. And I think that, Freiermuth bounces back with a good week. And, I was very concerned with the output from the 2 running backs, Najee and Jaylen Warren. So that scares me a little bit. Probably still start Najee if you have him though. And, Jaylen Warren, we'll kind of see what his role ends up being and whether he can kind of close that gap between the 2 of them.
Yeah, bit of a tough matchup for them this week. Cleveland's defense is pretty strong.
Yeah, completely. Now we jump into our flex locks of the week. Zach, last week it was abysmal for me as I had Sky Moore in my flex lock of the week. He finished with 0.4 PPR points. He couldn't even get 1 point. You took Jahan Dotson, so you win this week with 9 PPR points, Jahan Dotson. So you get first pick.
I'm going to go with the guy that I said I was going to speak about him a little bit later. That's Jamal Williams. I think he's a dynamite flex lock of the week. I mean, we're talking about a team in Carolina that just went up against Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson, and that was the entire offense for Atlanta last week. And I mean, go back to it if you're New Orleans. I think Jamal Williams will get in the end zone this week. I think he's a really solid flex option against this Carolina defense.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Jamal Williams, Tennessee, he was good against the run and, Carolina, I'm sorry. But, I think that he's going to end up being a really good runner this week. I think that I agree with you. He's probably going to put up a lot of points. And, yeah, I think that this is the week that he can get into the end zone. He's definitely a nice flex play for me. My guy, though, this week I'm taking Breece Hall. I mean, I just can't get around the fact that he rushed 127 yards on 10 carries. 10 carries in week 1. Zach Wilson there at quarterback. I think they're going to rely more on the run game. So, yeah, I think that he's definitely a flex status. He could be even higher in deeper leagues, but he's definitely flex status for me at least. He ripped up a 26-yard run on the first play of the game. That was like, oh boy, he's back. And then just, second quarter, breaks off that 83-yard run. He obviously, he saw as he started to get like 70 yards into that 83-yard run, he kind of started to slow down and he was like, oh God, I haven't played a game in a year. So I kind of lost some steam here. But, they started that drive on their own 4-yard line and it set them up to get a score. So, yeah, I'm taking Breece Hall this week. I think it's going to be another good week for him. Ones to watch now. So again, these are guys that we think, not that they'll score the most points this week, but they're guys that might end up being a waiver target for you next week. Zach, you had Van Jefferson on your list. I had Deion Jackson, and I'm kind of regretting that just from the sense of the fumbles. And, he didn't really prove himself to me. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and take another guy. I'm going to take Zach Moss. I think that listen, if you can't have one, you got to have the other. So I'm going with Zach Moss. I think that the fact that Deion Jackson is fumbling the ball, he has kind of proved. Listen, I can't trust him right now, and so I think that the coaches are going to feel the same exact way, that Zach Moss coming off the injury, and I think Deion Jackson might not actually have a great week this week, which is funny because he was my guy last week, but I don't think he's going to have a great week this week. Therefore, I think that they might lean into going into Zach Moss, especially as Zach Moss becomes healthy.
Yeah, I'm going with Zay Jones, and I think Zay Jones is going to have a solid week once again, and he's also going to be a waiver target next week. So a little bit of both there. I just think he's now the wide receiver too, and there's nothing to tell me anything else about Christian Kirk. And with what I saw last week, especially against Indianapolis, who's a weak secondary, if they had Zay Jones really rolling against that secondary and giving him those targets, he's the second wide receiver in my mind. I think he's going to be a guy to look out for on the waiver wire.
Yeah, Zay Jones, interesting, add there. And, again, it could be one of those additions that, as they start to spread the ball more and a guy like Calvin Ridley gets shadowed and double teamed and whatever, it could free up a guy like Zay Jones. And he's proven he has talent as well. So, a good ad there. And I mean, obviously the big waiver ad this week was Puka Nacua, and it means no worries unless you picked Van Jefferson. Zach, I know that last week you picked Van Jefferson. You meant to pick Puka Nacua, though. You just had the wrong Rams receiver. You had the right team, had the right role. It just came down to the wrong guy.
Yeah, Puka Nacua, and I lost out on Tutu Atwell, who also had a good week.
Yeah, of course. Yes, and Tutu Atwell, we'd be remiss. We didn't talk about him and, the impact that he had. And, yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. Just what is this Rams offense going to be like? Should be very interesting to see. Make sure that you guys like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us the thumbs up. We're going to come back next week with some more football as we recap week number 2. And we shall rise yet again. We will catch you guys next week in week number 3.